God and praise his holy name. He's worthy tonight. Hallelujah. As we enter, thank you, Lord Jesus. As we enter into your holy presence, yeah, we will worship God and praise his holy name. Yeah, 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 yeah. Yes, we enter, yeah, yeah, into his holy presence. We will worship God and praise his holy name. As we enter into your holy presence, oh, we will worship God and praise his holy name. Holy
Good morning. I'm Donald Curtis here at the Alethea Baptist Church, where Dr. Reid is senior pastor and founder. I want to welcome all of you to our Sunday morning enrichment hour. And this morning we're going to be discussing our Sunday school lesson. And this morning our lesson comes from Exodus chapter 18, verses 13 through 26. And the title lesson for today is God Provides Judges to Help Moses. And in this lesson today, what we're going to see here is that it's teaching a very vital principle here about leadership. And the principle is this: in order for leadership to be truly effective, it must be shared. And as we, in the previous lessons, as we've been following this nation of Israel, it's been about 2 months now since God has delivered them out of Egypt. And during this wilderness experience, in the previous lesson, we see how God has been using adversity and trials to test them and to teach them. We first see him testing them with a lack of water in order to teach them that he can meet all of their needs. Then secondly, we see he tests them with a lack of food and then he gives them bread from heaven in order to teach them that he is their provider. And then the last week's lesson, we saw that he tested them with war, with battle, and he gave them a great victory over the Amalekites, and that he was teaching them that he is also their protector. But in this morning's lesson, it's kind of a shift. It goes from dealing with them, the people, to dealing with the leadership. And as we see here in verse 8, in Exodus chapter 18, verse 13, beginning of our lesson, and it says, "And it came to pass on the morrow that Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood before Moses from morning until evening." Now, the thing we just see here is this. Notice the structure here of this verse. It's, "And it came to pass on the morrow that Moses sat to judge the people." Now, notice now, Moses not documenting this story here from the perspective or just information here. He's doing it from the perspective of an observer. He's, in fact, today we would say was being third terms, but it'll be in third person, in that he is using this structure here because he's actually teaching a principle here. And it's an illustration here of what leadership is about. So he's recording this lesson today from the perspective of an observer, as he was looking at this scene taking place between two other people. And notice what he says here, "And he sat to judge the people." In other words, Moses was having court. And if anyone has been in court, you know it's a long, exhausting process. You're sitting there, things moving slowly, and it can get very frustrating. And so, but he's showing us something here about leadership here. And so, and notice what he says here in verse 14. "And Moses' father-in-law saw all that he did to the people, And he said, what is this thing that thou doest to the people? Why sittest thou thyself alone, and all the people stand by thee from morning until evening? And see, Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, is observing this situation also. But notice the structure once again. He doesn't say, and when Moses' father-in-law saw all that he did. Now, he didn't say like my father-in-law. He's still projecting this as an observer, as he observing two people. But the thing about here I like about Moses, and when you see how humble a person he is, he was not offended by him being asked this question. Because many times, you know, and especially in women leadership, and someone questions what we feel like our authority, we take offense. But that's not the way Moses responded here. Because now, in today's terms, what we would do is we feel someone's questioning our authority or our leadership, the first thing we would do, we'd start throwing out our credentials. Because Moses could have easily said, oh, wait a minute, Jethro. Now, I was educated in Egypt. I got my bachelor's, I got my master's, I got my PhD, I can speak 10 different languages. It was I who brought these people out of Egypt. It was I who brought them through the Red Sea. It is I who gave them water from the rock. I know what I'm doing here. But it's not the way he responded here. See, this lesson here is about leadership. And see, it's not about throwing up our credentials. It's about leadership and being humble in that position. And so, like I said, he was not offended by this question. But I like how Moses responds here, because notice how he responds here in verses 15 and 16. And because basically what he was telling here is not what you know is not wrong, it's just too big for thou alone to do this task. And so Moses responded and said, well, and Moses said it to his father-in-law, because the people come unto me to inquire of God. When they have a matter, they come unto me, and I judge between one another. And I go and I do make them know the statutes of God and his laws. And so, the people coming to Moses, like I said, he was having court here because they knew that not only was he their leader, but he also was a prophet. And they knew that in that culture that God communicated with the prophets. He made his will known through the prophets. So they was coming to him to know the will. And then he also, it said, because they was coming to me to inquire of God. And then he noticed it, and Moses said, and I was taking this time also to teach them, to instruct them in the ways of God. And so he responds here, not, in hostility, or not saying that, hey, I'm thinking that you're trying to infringe upon my authority here. And that was not what Jethro was suggesting. He was not suggesting that what he was doing was wrong. He was suggesting that was too big a task for one individual. And then so after Moses, like I say, humbly tells him why he is doing this. And then in verse 17 here, Jethro responds. He said, and Moses' father-in-law said unto him, the thing that thou doest is not good. Now, he did not say what he was doing was wrong. What he said here, the thing he was doing was not good. And see, now this was not criticism nor put down. It is an observation. Many times when we're in position or authority and leadership, any questioning about our leadership and our authority, it is perceived as criticism or is perceived as an attack upon our authority. And as a result, consequently, many tasks go left undone. Many projects are incomplete because we perceive it to be an attack upon our leadership. And as a result, things go left undone. And notice how, and then so in verse 19 here, he begins to give me some advice here. He said, now, hearken now unto my voice, and I will give thee counsel, and God shall be with thee. Be thou for the people, guard the ward, that thou mayest bring the causes unto God. And so now the first thing he's going to deal with here, because he knows how the enemy tried to get into us and want us to feel like we're being attacked, and pride can get in there. So the first thing he does here, he clears that up immediately. He says, now, hearken unto my voice here. And that word, the hearken, has the idea to hear, to listen, and obey. And so that's the idea here, is to hear and obey. And it says now, and I will give thee counsel, and God shall be with thee. Be thou for the people God ward, that thou mayest bring the causes unto God. So the first thing you're doing here is establishing that you are still God's leader. You are still the one that represents the people before God. So sharing leadership or accepting advice from someone does not in any way diminish your authority, and it doesn't in any way diminish your responsibility. That's why you tell him you are still to represent the people, and you are still to teach the people. And that's what he says. He goes in verse 20. In verse 20 said, and thou shalt teach them the ordinances and laws and statutes. Show them the way wherein they must walk, and the work that they must do. And so, once again, see, what happened is this, that many times we can get so focused on the task at hand that we don't see the potential problems lurking in the background. And especially when we have, because keep in mind now, we're looking at a nation here over 2.5 million people here, 12 different tribes. You are bound to have misunderstanding. You are bound to have no conflict. And so if you're trying to manage that many people alone, 2.5 million people, it's too big for you. And what's going to happen, like us, when we go to a regular court setting, we know how long and frustrating that is. Can you imagine 2.5 million people? And not only that, you can't be everywhere at one time. And so there's going to be problem lurking there that you will never even realize is there if you're trying to monitor all these people alone. Remember, this lesson here is about leadership. And the thing I don't want you to miss here is this here. It's God's sovereignty is here. It is God who sent Jethro to Moses to deliver a message. And many times God, he sends us a message, but sometimes we're just not listening. And he does it according to Hebrews chapter 1. He said, in times past, God in sundry ways and in divers manner, he spoke to people. And sometimes it's just downright comical how he does it. Because now remember in Numbers, I think it's Numbers chapter 22, when the king of Moab sent to Balaam to come out and curse the people. Well, Balaam is communicating with the donkey and don't even think it's strange. God uses different ways. And then my favorite is like King David in 2 Samuel, I think it's chapter 7, whereas God sends Nathan to David to deliver a message. And he tells him this story. He says, there was a rich man in your kingdom, and there was a poor man. The rich man had all of these, he had all of these lambs, he had all of these flock, and this poor man only had one little ewe lamb. And that rich man took that little poor man took the one little lamb that he had. And when David heard this, he was just outraged. David said, look, the man who done this thing surely deserved to die. But then Nathan tell him, that man is you. So see, God sometimes when he is speaking, he sends us messages. He sends us advice. We're just not listening. And you think in the culture today, we have a pandemic going on worldwide. We have fires on the West Coast. We have storms on the East Coast. We have turmoil permeating the entire land. God is speaking, but a lot of times is we don't perceive it as a big booming voice from the sky, or we don't perceive it as some demonstration of power, that God is not speaking, or in some heavenly language that no one knows, that God is not speaking. No, God speaks in your normal, everyday term that you will surely understand. When the donkey was talking with Balaam, he wasn't speaking donkey. He wasn't speaking a heavenly language. He knew what he was saying, okay? And so, but in the thing what he does here, because it's about leadership. And see, and leaders have to be willing to understand when God is speaking and have to be willing to accept counsel and realize that accepting counsel doesn't in any way diminish your leadership. It does not diminish your authority. And so that's why he was telling him here. So like he will clear that up because that's what the enemy does. The enemy does that by trying to get into us and wants to think that someone is coming against us. That's not the issue here. And so I say God's sovereignty is at work here because it was God sent him to deliver this message. And he clearly wanted to understand here that he still was the one to represent, he was still God's leader. He was still to represent him before the people. And he was still supposed to teach the people. Now look at verse 21 here, because now this is the main verse in this whole text right here. And there's a lot in this text right here. And notice it said here, moreover, because now remember now he established the fact that Moses was still the leader and he still was to represent the people, still supposed to teach the people. But notice what it says here in verse 21, moreover, thou shalt provide out of all the people able men, as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness, and place such over them to be rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of fifties, and rulers of tens. Now, the first thing he said is, moreover, thou shalt provide out of all the people able men, faithful men. Now, faithful men. Then he said, as who fear God, men that would trust and obey God. Then he says, honorable men, men of truth, honorable men, hating covetousness, unlawful gain, corruption. Now, see, what he's saying is this right here. If you don't choose faithful men, then you're going to have a situation that's going to allow lying, deceit, and corruption. And these things will certainly lead to destruction. And so what we see right here so we see here that God is using, even before they get to Sinai, even before he gives the law, that he's already establishing a form of judicial system that the people need to adhere to. But the key behind that is faithful men, men that fear God, men that trust and obey God, men of truth, honorable men, men that hate covetousness, unlawful gain. And all because we were saying here this here, if you are lying, deceit, and corruption, it's going to definitely lead to destruction. And see, without some form of judicial system, it's only going to lead to just total chaos. And sadly, it's to say that we live in a culture today where these are the things that he was trying to prevent. Even before they gave him the law, he was already setting a judicial system to prevent these type things. We live in a culture today where these things are not being prevented. They are being encouraged. And he was trying to prevent these things. Because it brings to mind that like in Romans chapter 1, when Paul was writing to the Christians at Rome, he told them the very same thing. Immorality was spreading through the church, spreading through the Jews. And he said, look, even though they knew the ordinances of God, they did not honor God. That's in Romans 1, that's Romans 1:21. Then in Romans 1:32, he said, even though they knew the ordinances of God and knew the people who practiced these things, that it was worthy of death, he said not only did they not do the same thing, they encouraged the ones that did those things, gave it heart approval. And that is basically the culture that we're living in today, that no one is really trying to prevent the lying, deceit, and the corruption. And then and the reason why this verse is so important, because remember, this is about leadership. See, God is the one that sent Jethro to Moses to deliver this message. And the message said it's about leadership. And see, and he knew that as long as men, if you didn't have some kind of a judicial system, that people are going to do what they want to do. People just basically going to just do their own will. And he was trying to prevent that. But not only that, the most important thing was this right here. What he was doing, he was this right here. This was to be the model for the nation of Israel. It was going to be the model for the church. It was going to be the model for society. We see this and we see this also in 1 Timothy. We see this in 1 Timothy when Paul was telling Timothy to choose, to stand firm where it's been taught and teach this to other faithful men that they can pass it on. because he was trying to establish a culture to prevent these type things from happening. But like I said, today we are allowing these things here to happen, which was supposed to be a model for society. And now look at verse 22, he said, and choose these faithful men and let them judge the people at all seasons. That means at all times. And it shall be that the great matters they shall bring unto thee, but every small matter they shall judge, so that it will be easier for thyself and for thyself, and they shall be they shall be able to bear the burden with thee. And see what he's saying here, shared leadership does not diminish your authority. In fact, you go from a power of one to a power of 1,000. Your effort is going to be multiplied exponentially. It's going to, while you're reaching one at a time, you're going to be reached thousands at a time if you understand the principle of shared leadership. It doesn't diminish, it enhances. And he said, and you judge, and let them judge the people at all seasons. And then all the great matters they should bring to you. In other words, it was like a judicial system here. It's like, the lower courts, then you had the Supreme Court. And what he telling Moses here, you are still God's leader. You are still has the responsibility to represent the people before God. And so they will handle the daily, conflict, the daily, the strifes they have among themselves. But every big case that then they will come before you. So leadership shared does not diminish one's authority. And look at verse 23 saying, and if thou shalt do this thing, and God command thee so, then thou shalt be able to endure, and all this people shall go to their place in peace. And notice what it's saying here. Even though when someone is giving us advice, it's good sign godly advice when they say, now, even though I'm giving advice, but now you still got to validate it through God. See, God is still going to be the final authority here. God is still got the one that have to give you the divine approval. So if I'm telling you something, and if I don't put God in it, then hey, you can't question that. And you look at society today, we got all kinds of choosing sides and throwing out this and taking this. And see, the enemy does that. He come along and get us caught up in all these social issues and all these things and leave God out of it. And no one is talking about God. And so the advice he gives here, he said, look, even though it may be good, sound advice, but still it's got to be validated through God. God still has to get the final approval on there. So even when people come to us with advice, we still got to carry it to God. We still got to pray about it, and make sure that it is God's will, not that someone is trying to pull you into that mode. And see, the thing about it is right here. See, the enemy does that. And the thing is that it said is to move you away from the kingdom objective to the world objective. See, our objective, our purpose is to bring people to Jesus, membership in his family, develop them to Christ-like maturity, equip them for their ministry in life, in world, in order to magnify God's name. That is the kingdom objective. And if you get the kingdom objective straight, you can get the world objective straight. But we got to make sure that the advice that we are getting is godly advice. And God is the one that is establishing this. Because remember, this was God's sovereignty. God the one that sent the message to Moses. And it's about leadership. Like I said, in time past, he was dealing with the people. But in today's lesson, he's dealing with the leadership. Because he know that even in a culture like that, 2 months out, if there's not some form of judicial system, you're going to have total chaos. And so, I better keep God first and do not let the enemy move us off from the kingdom objective. Remember, our purpose is to bring people to Jesus first. Okay? And then look at verse 23, it says, and if thou shalt do this thing, and God command thee so, then they shall be able to endure, and all the people shall also go to their place in peace. In other words, it brings down all the confusion, all the conflicts, because now, instead of, one man standing there trying to judge all of these people, and you know how it is when, you're standing there and things not getting done, you feel like you wait all day and then you get frustrated. See, these are the things that is underlined under the surface here that you don't even see them coming if you're trying to do this alone, and they're going to crop up on you, and you're going to just total chaos. Leadership is very important. And then verse 24 it says, and so Moses hearkened unto the voice of his father-in-law and did all that he said. Now, that word there, hearken. Now, notice now, back in verse 19, he used this word also, but he used it in, notice it, and hearken now into my voice. Remember now, this word means to hear and to obey. But notice in verse 19, it's in the present tense. It says hearken. That means to hear, to listen. Now look at verse 24 here, and it says, and Moses hearkened. You know, past tense. See, not only did he hear, but he also obeyed. He also obeyed, and that's what you want to see here. So when Moses realized that, hey, this is from God, he not only heard the message, he obeyed the message. And we truly can't say like we hear unless we obey, because they go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. Now, I can hear something and not do it. It's like wearing a mask. I can have the mask with me. If I'm not wearing the mask, it's totally ineffective. Okay? And so now, and look at verse 25. And Moses, no, he hearkened into what he had said, and he chose able men out of all of Israel and made them heads over the people, rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, and rulers of fifties, and rulers of 10. So he did the thing. So he went from a power of one to a power of thousands. Now his effort is being multiplied. And look at verse 26. And they judged the people at all seasons. The hard cases they brought unto Moses, but every small matter they judged it for themselves. And so we have to keep in mind that there was a shift here. God was dealing with leadership. And we must understand as leaders that advice and counsel is not an attack upon our authority or our responsibility. It's only to come alongside to help us. And to where we can only reach one, we can reach thousands. Okay, that concludes our lesson for today. And I hope you always stay with us at the Leeds Baptist Church, because at 10:30 a.m., our senior pastor, Dr. Reid, is coming up with a message out of the book of Revelation. This is really, really good. You don't want to miss this. And may God continue to bless all of you, and you all have a wonderful